Yeah.
Okay, I'm recording locally. So we'll get it via OBS and kind of see what's going on there. Let's see. I should reply to this using my come here. Dan and I have a production meeting. Give us, uh, let us know your opinions. Heckle as much as you want. Like,
How do I get back to the? Oh, okay, here it is. Right. Where are my windows? Why bother getting a window manager on an iPad when you can't even work your Windows on a Mac?
so are you? Do you have an iPad with you? The thing I've been doing is the sidecar thing recently. So I have three
Yeah.
screens in front of me, which I've quite enjoyed.
I forget what does Sidecar do. Sidecar extends your Mac screen
iPad, yeah, and it just
onto
works
an
as an
iPad.
app, so you can actually swipe it away if you really need to. But all you got
Oh,
to do is
cool.
go into the upper right corner for the like control panel thing on your Mac. Go down to screen
Yeah.
mirroring, and if you tap that, you can pick the iPad. So I've currently got our production notes on there. Um, yeah. Hmm, okay, so put on screen. Close these windows. So, man, I've got a lot of blue sky windows open.
See,
Let me see if I make this more narrow. What happens?
I've been away. Has anything happened on Blue Sky while I've been away?
Yeah, a couple things.
I yeah. Do we have a problem with people who can't take a joke?
I mean, yes, as always. I mean, this is the perennial thing with social media that you have identified previously, and um, the reason why the do not reply cards are so vital. Um, and I actually did a little bit of noodling on that previously, and we talked about labelers and tagging in the past, and how they might be used. And I think that like self-tagging posts, I now have a clearer sort of thought about where those should show up. And like the pattern that I would like to see is being able to tag a post with the type of do not reply card, and then having the do not reply card show up above
For the thing. Yeah.
the editing dialog for a new post.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, oh, so you don't actually, right. So it
it
doesn't show
it
up.
it
It's
could
part of
be
the
in
flow.
the
Yeah, it
post.
could.
It should
Right.
actually be
But
part of the
in
reply,
the
right?
reply, yeah.
Yeah, that's where it should show up. Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely, right.
So
So
it's metadata that alters the post that alters the UX flow, the
yeah,
subsequent UX flow.
yes,
Which are there any examples of that?
I don't know, man.
We should patent that and then give it away for free
Yeah,
or not. Um, that's really neat.
because I mean, I was
Where
thinking
else
about
could you
like
use something like that?
what is it ultimately, right? It is a type of self-tagging, and like the fun part of the do not reply cards are that they are a a jokey way of anticipating the types of replies that you're going to get kind of no matter what, right? And so in that way, it's more meta commentary than it is actually a functional thing. I'm like,
Yeah,
why not just push it down into that? Like, how do you make it more functional and make it a little bit more of a pre? It's not quite pre-moderation, but like like ways that you can
it's a
opt into.
PS.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
post. It's actually a post. It's how would you? Yeah, it's a postscript.
and so like how that shows up in other people's interfaces is actually like the interesting kind of question there, right? Um, and being able to actually like even if it's something like minimal, but like this person does not want replies, right? You can still post
Right.
or whatever, but like make it really super fucking clear what the intent is and the type of solicitation feedback that you're actually asking for.
That way, you can also point out that something is a joke without ruining the joke,
Yeah, and yeah,
right? Because the fact that it's not a joke doesn't show up when you just view the post, but when you reply, if one were to reply, you have the option of pointing out that this is a shit post,
yeah,
if you want.
right.
Uh, and as with all things, this only works if it is, this works best if it's incorporated into the client that most people use,
Yes.
because your client could just not respect that,
Yeah,
because
but I
can't,
mean,
like,
but that's I think kind of true of this general space, right? The thing that
right?
we're
Yeah,
talking about is metadata about the post and the expectations of what type of like anybody can engage with it any kind of way that they want. The question is what sorts of
yeah,
expectation should they have in the replies that they're going to get to that.
yeah. So it's another way of setting social context without
Yeah.
having to.
Which,
Yeah,
this comes back to the things that we talked about in terms of like drone field auras, right?
yeah. So that's cool.
So I figured it out. It's been a
You
fucking
you did
year,
figure it
and
out.
it's too
Yeah,
late. But well, it's not too late. But like we
it's
need
not
to
too late.
figure out some of that stuff. And the key part to this is two part, right? You need to be able to self label posts. That's critical.
Right,
And the other part is being able to have it show up as context within the replies. And so I think
right,
that, like, for example, we could mock up a demo of the way that we would want this to work. I could even see ways in which we can engineer it to work. But then, we need to find the capacity to actually make it and then try and get it merged or whatever. I do think that this is the type of thing that like could make a differentiator compared to other social networks for what it's worth.
yeah,
And a sort of more explicit control. And it might be feasible to build it and demo it in a web app, or just a fork of the Blue Sky front end. Setting up the Blue Sky front web app, and that connects with the Blue Sky backend and all that sort of stuff is actually super easy.
yeah.
So tinkering around with it is totally doable, but like what I'm saying is I've got a path forward there. Like we should actually like sketch it out and drive that. I think it'd be fun.
We could do that live. We could stream us doing that.
We could at another date.
That is, yes, that is
So
a thing
yeah,
that we could do.
yeah, we should put it in the notes. Um,
Uh, so, so,
so
one thing that we were going to talk about was talking about what we want to do with the show, which I
yeah,
interpreted as going over the show values again, explaining to anyone who happens to be watching or watching later, also that we can get clear on it ourselves what this show is about and why
yeah.
anyone would listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is we've largely just been streaming partly to get the thoughts out, partly to sync up, to talk about things. But I think that there are things that we want to get out of this and make tighter. And some of that starts with what the values we have are and what we think is important about the social internet. I've been having a couple of chats here and there with other people, and I'm like, what's the applicability of this, sort of generally speaking, and where we want to go, and like how many people actually do understand this, and what's the sort of legibility for these pieces, which is complicated. And I think it's worth sort of talking about what we've thought about this and what we think is useful to communicate.
So the big thing that we figured out was that this is a podcast about we live in a society mediated by technology, and how should technology meet society's needs, where it falls short, where it is actively working against that right now. It is a very broad thing.
Yeah, and another way that I would put this is we now live in a technologically mediated society, and when people talk about the way these platforms work and what they do, they talk about them solely in the framing of product thinking. And I think that that is useful in some ways. But talking about whether or not society is successful through the lens of whether Meta is successful is like crazy. Like, that's insane. And so thinking about are platforms actually serving our needs? Is social media, what is social media doing for us? What is that sort of like dynamic? I think is actually important, right? And what the forward looking perspective on that is, and what the fuck we're all doing here, right? Is kind of one of the things that I think is cool and fun. Oh, maybe that's not the right way to frame that.
What, cool and fun?
Cool and fun. Yes, that definitely makes me
Well,
feel like the
that would
zillennial
be.
dad.
um, there's a lot of context involved in the phrase cool and fun. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily literally mean cool and fun.
Yeah.
I did have a thought, which
Okay.
was, if I were back at law school now, then what would a class about this look like? Not in terms of a narrowly construed, First Amendment regulating speech and
Hmm.
social media, but in a wider perspective of what its role is, and not just through something like competition law, right? But something bigger than that. So probably not law, probably back into SDS or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
or civics, wherever civics gets taught these days.
Or don't.
Or isn't.
Yeah.
Um, so a way that we could do that is we could break it up by topic or by theme. So the various strands of what social media is doing for us and where. I'm trying to figure out what makes this podcast different, apart from the fact that you and I are doing it, which makes it better.
Yes, everyone must have a podcast. And then everybody must fight about which podcast is best.
Right, which is why our podcast is about fighting.
Yes.
I saw an interesting thing this week while I was not really on social media,
Hmm.
about someone kind of shit something out into the ether, uh, about how campaigning is different than governing,
Yep.
and has been for a long time, but the two have been more closely correlated. But being good at campaigning has been historically more correlated with being good at governing, whatever good means. being capable of good governing, and that the delta between the two has gotten increasingly nuts to get to where we are today, where you have shit posters who are very, very good at shit posting for campaigning, and now turning out to govern via shit posts. Um,
Yes. Um,
and whether this is an interesting thing or
I
not.
mean, there's a lot to unpack there, right? Because some of this is like, all right,
Yeah,
what's the proximity of campaigning and governing? And some of like, if you can run a campaign, can you actually run an organization, functionally speaking, right? And I think that that is a complicated
right.
topic, and I think increasingly complicated in a world where the campaigns aren't the things that are fundamentally in control. The dynamics of campaigns have changed, right? And there's super PACs, and there are special interests, and there are media organizations, and there are nation state actors, and all that sort of stuff, right? Um, and whether or not campaigning qualifies you for running an organization, one,
Right.
and then two, um, are there is actually a relationship to me between campaigning and being able to get people power and support around certain sorts of topics and ideas, and then being able to drive those through the process of like legislating or like policy making, probably, right? And being able to marshal people to those ends. I think that's different than the types of policy making, prioritization, and so forth that governing itself then fundamentally requires. Because, like,
Yeah.
if you look at the Trump administration, right, like, is the Trump administration doing what they think that they should be doing? I think the answer to that is yes. They are
Yes.
meeting their policy objectives.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
And more.
right. And the question is, do we think that that is adequate for the long term success and sustainment of the United States, if you care about that sort of thing, or as citizens probably do care about that? That's a different question.
Mm.
I think, right? Like, is the Trump administration doing what they think they should be doing, and are they succeeding at that? And is that what the their their supporters want? Right.
While listening to you, I've also simultaneously finished the argument in my head, which is we've already had personality-based campaigning, but it's been divorced from um, capacity for well thought through and executed policy. Uh, and we've had figureheads for a while. And as a child of the 80s, my easiest thing to reach for is that time when Ronald Reagan became president, right? And then the coalition between being able to have a charismatic, you know, um, campaigning figurehead and the alliance between that and ideological policymakers.
Yeah.
So I think, like you're saying, like that's his thing. Maybe one of the things that to get tighter on what we're interested in and what we're talking about, because I remember what you've been talking about before, which is microblogging good?
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Which is like, is having a president who kind of sets policy through however much he can fit in a Mastodon fork text box good? Because that is an example of technologically mediated and constrained and intentionally designed um, affordance for, in this particular case, policy making.
yes. And I would push it further in two directions. One, which is that if you think about what Trump's media ecosystem is like, right, I think that it is broader than that because, of course, he responds to the television news. His
Yeah,
ecosystem responds to what's happening on X.
yeah,
And so there's a couple of things there. And then they also respond to, nation states.
yeah.
Um, and so, what's the discussion in the meta, I think, becomes important in where that's defined. And one of the things about the era of social media when it comes to organizing people, right? I think that that's somewhat different. That's changed the game. Um, uh, or sorry, the politics of the early 2000s, of course, resembled a ecosystem where most people are paying attention to the television news. And we are now living in a world where the thing that most people are paying attention to is social media, and these social networking sites. And that's where the question of like, is microblogging good is an interesting one. And I think that the Zohran Mandami in the New York City Democratic primary is like instructive. I've had so many conversations about New York politics over the past
Right.
week, and like I fucking live in Oakland. It doesn't affect
Yeah.
me at all,
Right.
except for in the most narrow of ways. Um, do I think that Andrew Cuomo sucks and should lose, and that it's hilarious that he lost? Yes, absolutely. And so, like the Sex Pest Caucus getting shoved in a locker is fantastic. But
Yes.
outside of that, nationalizing the New York City mayoral election is crazy. But that's happening both on social media, and that looks like success in some cases, and I think is necessary, and is also bad, right? Like fundamentally not actually constructive, in some ways. Like if you're a leftist or if you want change within the Democratic Party, maybe Zohran Mandami's style of rhetoric and the things that he is advocating for and the type of campaigning that he's done is useful, instructive, something that people can learn
Hmm.
from. Are the details of the New York City mayoral election meaningful or helpful to anybody else? No, no, they're not. um, and the
I
extent
kind
to
of
which, yeah,
I kind of disagree,
okay,
but I also want to kind of put a pin in it and just say we could get distracted and talk about politics. Um, so my
yeah, but this
disagreement
is
is that
about recommenders, and this is about the way that
yes.
conversations happen, right?
So so in that case, um, you said that most people got their information from television news in the early 2000s, and now most people get their information from social media. And I feel like we're the kind of people who want to be precise about that, or at least citation needed about it,
Yeah, let me go look up some
which is
Pew Research studies.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go see the latest Pew, um, uh, because we can also split that up into well, what demographic, right? Are we talking about people who actually vote? People who actually vote at what level? Are we talking about so do we split it that way? Do we split it about you know people whose actions matter in a particular sense in the participation in civic life and government? Um, what social media they participate in, and also the kind of the second order effects, which are the people who edit and write for the increasingly smaller audience of mainstream media, whatever that is, who are, the analog human equivalent of our recommenders, right? Or our
Hmm.
agenda setters,
Yeah.
right? What are they paying attention to? Are they disproportionately paying attention to social media because they are on social media and they see what other people on social media are giving a shit about? Or, for example, back when Twitter had the news team, right?
Yeah.
Um, or had the trending. I can't remember what it was called.
Doesn't
Um,
matter. We yeah.
right. It's like once you are, European style, a sufficiently large online platform. Ah, I'm writing that one down because sufficiently large online platform, sufficiently large.
I mean, Europe's got
Acronyms to
VLOPs,
slop.
right?
Yeah,
Stop
no,
it.
but sufficiently large acronyms
Yeah.
to slop, and I like that more.
Yeah, that's very funny.
um,
We should post that.
yeah.
We're Dan has just coined a new term. Here, let me find the uh,
Oh, cool. Madeline Ashby is going to come.
sorry.
Madeline Ashby.
Has just coined a new term, sufficiently large online platforms, or as we like to call them, slop.
Right. So where was I? Citation needed on where most people get their information on, and being more precise in who we mean by most people.
Uh-huh.
Um, and an asterisk, which is most people don't care
Mm-hmm.
until it impacts them locally, and even you know, which opens up an entire avenue of civic participation and whether technology does or does not enable civic participation at whichever level. Um, you know, our recommenders, no matter what form they are in, as crowbars for Overton windows for what is socially acceptable in terms of where you're pushing policy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the recommenders though. And this feels like another another exploration of I can't remember the name. The thing where you are in. Oh, right, filter bubbles. So it's not just a filter bubble, I don't think, because if you're talking about someone like the president, um, it's also like it works like a laser, right? So it's amplification. It's not just filtering of what goes in and out, but it's also amplification of what you hear back about what you are saying,
Yeah,
right?
the feedback loop.
Yes, yes. So not just because to me, filter bubble always seemed to imply, um, a one-way semi-permeable membrane rather than also one that is somewhat reflective on the inside. Um,
Well, I think if yeah, and I mean that sort of connects to the discourse around how much of the conversation did you catch about negative media reaction to Blue Sky recently?
right.
Did you catch any of it? Josh Barrow wrote a article about how Blue Sky is a containment dome, which I think is very
Oh
funny.
no, I didn't. Well, like an outlet for
Uh, so Barrow wrote this piece, and then a number of haters showed up to say, "Yeah, Blue Sky sucks. It is basically a radioactive wasteland of like leftists yelling at people and trying to chase them off the platform." And I have two feelings about that: lol and true. And the Masnick actually ended up writing a piece in response to it, which I think was quite good. And I think that there's a perception, certainly, that Blue Sky is um, a left wing space, which I don't think is wrong, probably. Um, and I think deviates from the original intent around Blue Sky and the sorts of ethos that Masnick certainly has written about. Um, and I had a chat actually with a former Blue Sky employee last week, talking about how more people need to show up on Blue Sky and be able to craft their own experience fundamentally, um, and not feel like it is just left wing Twitter. Um, the uh, challenge is that I think that that's hard and unclear to do how to do, and then also unfortunately this was sort of a monkey's paw moment. So I was talking with Emily about this, and then fucking JD Vance showed up to troll people on
yeah,
Blue Sky that day, and I'm like, this is not what I meant. But I do actually think that some of these people need to show up and like tough it out a little bit more, or have tools that help them curate their experience so that they get what they want. Because Blue Sky actually only ultimately succeeds, or AT Proto only succeeds if there is a more of a diversity of uh, people posting,
Yeah.
and at the same time, I do think that it's important that communities can defend themselves. It's a needle to thread, certainly.
Um, hey, so my good friend Madeline Ashby is trying to join. So I
Join
wonder
the
if you would be
oh
open to
yes,
join Streamplace, but can't log in. But I wonder if you're open to us just having her on.
sure.
Um,
You wanted to dial in? I'll have to rearrange the OBS a little bit, but we can do that.
yeah, let me, and I'll just I'll give her a Zoom link
Yeah.
to if she wants to come. Invite, copy, invite link. Okay. Um, cool. Yes. Uh,
We'll
right.
just keep an eye out with the Zoom here.
So, so,
So,
so this is kind of another way of restating what we were talking about before, which is that so far Blue Sky is um, a a Twitter in a trench coat that wants to be more than that. Right. So it's the skeuomorph. It's the skeuomorph Twitter built on a thing that wants to be bigger than the skeuomorph.
no,
Um,
it's another thing that has uh, put on it has put on a costume that so looks like Twitter that everybody just thinks it's Twitter.
right. And I'm going to add to that, but in diversity of user base and interestingness, Blue Sky is still a subreddit compared to Reddit,
Yes, I agree.
and it won't get more interesting. So I saw something about all the attempts to have like sports on Blue Sky, and it keep and how they
It's
keep
working.
how the well. So the post that I saw was a perception that this person was trying to do sports on Blue Sky, but anytime they posted about sports on Blue Sky, a whole bunch of resist libs tried. The experience was that a whole bunch of resist libs, shouted them down and was all kind of like, what aboutism about like, don't you care about, why don't you fucking like sandwiches? Hey, Madeline.
Hey, Madeline.
Hello. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Uh,
like totally intrude. I just thought you're helping me
Welcome.
procrastinate. So like you're helping me.
uh, Ted, do you know
You're
Madeline?
I do
I
not.
don't
Are you
Hi.
think
aware?
I don't think we've ever met.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm
Oh,
a science fiction writer. So
Yeah,
lovely.
I know what I
and a
do.
futurist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Those are both things that I'm a fan of.
yeah, I'm so glad.
uh, we were we were kind of trying to figure out what the point of our podcast is, other than we know what the point of our podcast is.
Yeah.
We were talking more about. Oh, Ted, you do it.
We were talking about, and I'm going to be moving a couple of things around in our OBS scene at the same time while we're talking about this, so please bear with me. This started out as a production meeting about what's important that we want to talk about on the internet, and then and the sort of like quick summary about that is that at this point we live in a sort of technologically mediated society. And so when people talk about what social media platforms are doing to us or doing with us, right, it's usually done through the lens of either like STS and sort of just broad general criticism of these platforms in a sort of analytical capacity, or they're talking about them ultimately in the like, how successful is this platform or not? How much money does Meta have right now? Right, and there's a piece to that that gets lost, which is sort of an intentionality around the way that we use these spaces and what they're kind of for. And so that's some of what we're kind of interested in talking about. And I come from a product and engineering background, sci-fi nerd along with Dan, and so we've got some similar perspectives around that. But like, um, the building that you see in these spaces tend to be small scale or dare I say it, academic, around the types of like things that people prototype and build. And what's kind of interesting about this moment are things like AT Proto and Blue Sky showing up that are trying to do something different at scale. But we haven't really seen people talk about what these dynamics are and what the incentives are and how these things change and how we're kind of like doing this stuff together. So like it's kind of like just talking about engineering and product stuff, but actually like it's kind of about what are we all doing here. So
So before I was a I was sort of always a science fiction writer. Like I was always a writer. I was like an only child who talked to herself a lot. And I rehearsed stories. I would do voices. I would do funny voices. And like because my parents had no money, they never took me to a doctor for this, which is probably how it survived. But the before I was working in Foresight, I got a degree in Japanese animation, cyborg theory, and fan studies or fan culture. So like that's actually what this conversation reminds me of more is that it reminds me of the conversation around um, intentional online spaces going back as far as Usenet and going back as far as some of those spaces that were very deliberately curated and really aggressive in their mission statements
Hmm.
as a way of claiming a space and then drawing people to it rather than like trying to hunt down everybody. They sort of it was a real, I think those early spaces were real lessons in authenticity. I was just having this conversation with somebody that um, when you are consistent or when a space is consistent, the people who are attracted to it will just go there. Like there,
Yeah.
if like in a relatively frictionless environment. But if they know about it. So there's those two tasks. How do they know and is it easy? But aside from that, the draw usually is, are we about the thing that you're about and are we consistently about it? And that is very different from the either the everything app idea
Yeah.
uh, or the no, we want to be in every home and wherever. Like we want to be on every surface of your home. We want to be in every relationship you have. Like those two things are very different. And I think like that's where looking at something like fan studies is really useful because they've also done a lot of this chronicling work and a lot of this
uh-huh.
research into online spaces and digital spaces and online third spaces and sort of um, and then the failures of those, like what happened to LiveJournal, right?
Yeah.
And stuff, what happened to Six Apart, and like those kinds of things is like extraordinarily relevant. So yeah, like it reminds me of those, you know, sort of early online studies of what happens to your neighborhood bar
Uh-huh.
is sort of what it reminds me of.
Well, and I think this is kind of thing. So one of the sort of running themes that Dan and I have talked about is like what is blue sky actually, right? And
Mhm.
we could talk about that at a bunch of different levels. And I look at this through the lens of a couple of different things. There's some of the like engineering pieces and what does blue sky mean technically and what sorts of things are possible. And then there's sort of higher level either product or strategic kind of thinking about this, right? So like what's the overarching discussion? And some of this is like well, we now live in a space where there's like a lot of like explicitly microblogging platforms and media people, for example, are like, oh, I guess we just live in a world where we have to post to a cajillion platforms now. And is that good? Is that bad? Like people aren't sure about that. And like even if that is sustainable in some ways. And that's sort of like just a predicate thing. And but there are other pieces like everybody just thinks that blue sky is Twitter, and it is very convincingly a Twitter. But actually, it's something much more complicated about it than a Twitter. And Dan and I have talked about this being a skeuomorphism, and I even joked that like Blue Sky, the PBC, is actually a distributed systems research company that happens to have made a hat that looks like Twitter. And
Oh yeah, like Flickr. Yeah.
yeah, and so despite the fact that AT Proto is, I think, a substantially more significant technological achievement and bodes for a bunch of interesting possibilities, and actually opens up a bunch of like interesting product spaces. Nobody understands or recognizes that right now, and it's kind of easing people away from this like skeuomorphic understanding of Blue Sky. And so some of this is like, okay, Blue Sky, the company, and the product that they've built is a Twitter, and the people who they have captured as their initial early adopter audience are weird nerds and leftists. And now there's a whole bunch of people who are just assuming that's all it is. So the companies hit this like crossing the chasm moment, if you're talking in product speak, and they're trying to figure out how to broaden that out and figure out where to go. But some of that is informed by what your host or your early adopter audience is like and the sorts of things that they care about, which is where I think the fan studies piece is meaningful and interesting in terms of like adjacencies with other communities.
Yeah. What touches other stuff? Like where do those webs intersect? How do people find you? Or what is it that is in common? That used to be the strength of the algorithm, was that if you like this, then that.
Yeah.
Rather than more like this.
Yeah.
Because the system used to be, these systems used to be able to, and some of them are still quite good at it, to detect commonalities or similarities between either the community or the content or basically the meta tagging or whatever it was that associated those two things. So if there were X percentage of people who liked A and X percentage of people who liked B, but they were both at C, what were the commonalities there?
Which you would
so
think.
like that's where like that is where like that sort can be really, really great. But also in context, if you go to a convention where everyone looks the same, there's not like necessarily data about why everyone is wearing the same polar fleece vest. It's just assumed that, they're all wearing the same polar fleece vest or whatever.
And so,
yeah.
So being able to spot interesting commonalities technically is a lot easier right now because of force feeding everything through a whole bunch of GPUs and then getting your position in word vector space.
Right.
Right.
But that's not what they want to do. That's not usually what the owner wants to do.
No, that's not what.
Because what they want to do is find the richest of those users and get them. Like that's the other thing, is like you could take an accurate picture of a customer base, a user base, an electorate, a sample size, whatever, but that's not what the actual goal is. And that's where it gets really skewed.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a thought. So Ted occasionally has said things like, "Is microblogging good? Was micro?" And you mentioning LiveJournal made me think about this, which was that LiveJournal was, if you go back to Twitter was microblogging, so you wouldn't say that Blogger was a community, right?
No.
You wouldn't have said that Blogger was a social network. You would have said that Blogger is a place where you can write about whatever you want, and then maybe people will show up in the comments and more people will read you, and then you can create a community around your blog. And then maybe, through your link roll, then you'll find other ones like it.
It's a lot it was a lot closer to a kiosk. It was like buying a cart.
Yeah, right. And what Blogger also wasn't necessarily good at mapping out was, that landscape of like-minded communities that I think LiveJournal was better at because of tagging than Blogger. When Twitter came along and you get microblogging, then I think that coincides. I'm making this shit up in my head, and I think that coincides with the public square kind of everyone in one place and everyone talking about one thing. Where in Twitter, the joke was it's for people in San Francisco sharing pictures of what they had for breakfast with their friends. Which is totally fine for a small platform. It would have been like a group blog for that. But then when it expands out to, it's the way that I used to get really pissed off when I was at the ad agency and we're working on Facebook, or Facebook would describe itself as a community. I'm like, there is no such thing. There are communities on Facebook. Facebook can enable communities. You would not say, for example, that there is the community of everyone who watches TV.
Yes.
To the extent that I would say, but television without pity is really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to go back to your original point, right? Like the Usenet forum for ER,
Hmm.
very specific thing. You know, subreddits can be really, really great because you actually know why you're there. And this, so microblogging without the tagging, you know, pre-hashtag, or arguably hashtags did let communities start coalescing around
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
on Twitter. They were like a
Hmm.
slight affordance towards that. Um, but I think maybe one of the things that Ted you were getting at is in like is microblogging good was that's just another example of stupendous context collapse in favor of commercialism and gathering an audience and just saying I came up in my head, Madeline, when you were talking about Pokemon platforms,
Yeah.
which are ones that want to get big enough to catch every single user, right? Like
Right.
that's the point of them.
Right.
They don't want the
Yeah. No,
best experience, right?
it's it's deep sea trawling, right? It's
Right.
just it's like we, the user, becomes bycatch. And like we're just bycatch. Like it's just,
Oof.
but the value of the bycatch is I caught this much bycatch. Uh that adds to my valuation. Now acquire me. Like it has nothing to do, right? Yeah, I'm fun at
I
parties.
Yeah, understandably. I mean, I can already tell that we would get on, and I'm trying to like the I think that is the mentality around the economic. So part of all of this is actually the sustainability and the longevity of these systems, right? And one of the challenges is. Um, if you make a thing, how do you keep it going, right? And I think that that's true. And the place I'm going with this is coming back to this notion of skeuomorphism, right? And is Blue Sky and the AT Proto Network Twitter? Um, and one of the challenges is the more that Blue Sky plays the role of a Twitter, the more that everybody just believes it's a Twitter, like I was saying, but the more that that actually reinforces a bunch of narratives around the way that Blue Sky needs to operate and the legibility of what this thing is. And that includes
Hmm.
funders, right? That includes
Yeah.
funders of all sorts. That includes venture capitalists and the metrics that they use in order to understand whether this thing is working or not. And like, so Paul Graham, for example, was posting about Blue Sky's metrics and the spikiness and the fact that Blue Sky clearly has a leaky bucket in terms of their acquisition and the rate of churn. That's all true. I think that that is actually a problem for the company, likely. Um, does that mean that AT Proto goes away over the long term? Don't know. And then if you are Blue Sky, what are the metrics that you have for success? And again, whether that is broader long term success and sort of sustainability of this network over the long term, and if it continues getting used, whether your microblogging platform and the like app that you've built continues being able to run, and who's going to give you money to keep it going, whether that is venture capitalists, whether that's advertisers, whether that's somebody like the user base itself, right? And the problem when coming back to the trawling piece and whether we're bycatch or not is sustainability looks different at different levels of scale. And one of the reasons why Facebook and Twitter were able to succeed was nobody knew how to judge them initially, and so and venture capitalists were willing to give them runway, and then they turned to a different economic engine, which happened to be advertising and happened to have characteristics around it, which allowed it to do a bunch of things. Right, advertising is well matched for really peaky, spike driven usage, and social media has those characteristics, right? And feeds into those characteristics. So if you want something different, or if you want to change those incentives about whether we're bycatch or not, or fundamentally we have some sort of stake of franchise in these systems, like social media has these characteristics, and we've got to work within those constraints. And Blue Sky is working within those constraints. What are the other paths that you can kind of find within the product space and also the like business space, which starts to get really gnarly about like what is our franchise on all of this, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's and that's, I guess, like where for me it comes back to that authenticity piece, because I think if you're doing something well, if you do the thing that you promised to do, if you do what you said on the tin very well, your users will become your advertisers in their own way, right? Because like they will spread the word in whatever way. Like they will use your service more than they use Threads, which is, you know, I Threads is like
Now,
a
I'm going to
for
come out
me.
and say I like Threads.
I can't I think I'm just not built for it. I don't know what it
Do I
is.
need to try to go back?
It always feels to me like a flash mob performance of Glengarry Glen Ross. And and I don't, and to be fair, like some people may enjoy that. Like that might be it. It just might be a taste
Which
thing.
is fine. Which
Yeah,
is kind of what
exactly.
I think we're
Exactly.
saying. Which is like there
Yeah.
is a defined there maybe, or it looks like there's a clearly defined audience who wants that and is totally
Yeah.
fine with it.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
yeah.
this is one of the things I was saying to Blaine, right? Like, we should not think of we should not think of Instagram as communities, or a replacement for communities. Instagram is a replacement for TV, and fundamentally,
Mhm.
all they want you to do is swipe a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of stuff, continue to participate in the ecosystem, and they have an aesthetic engine that they're driving with a certain set of creators and being able to select those creators. But really, what they're doing is creating television, and
I
that vibe.
disagree.
Okay, that vibe is what they've carried into Threads as well. And so Threads to me is a much more visual ecosystem, and I've like tuned. I was very explicit about tuning my usage there, around trying to find things that were either UX and UI prototyping, people doing indie game development, or like Blender
Yeah,
3D type of stuff. And
yeah.
so I like that's mostly what my feed is. And now some of the politics has snuck back in because I've been liking some of that stuff. But to me, Threads is much more adjacent to that sort of Instagram-y, like this thing is the thing that you do when you're turning your brain off, as opposed to a sort of participatory medium to me.
I think so. So you can look at so Madeline, I thought that was really interesting about, a reminder to think about where it is that platforms started and what they were for the specific groups of people, right? So Facebook, you can map Facebook growth through its various phases of this is for a college, this is for only people at colleges. We are going to have growth teams for college to college to college. We're going to go country by country. It's still in the UK. It's still launched at colleges. Uh, and then I think, and I'm going to make this up, and then pivoting from, okay, well, these people aren't at college anymore. So now we're going to try Facebook Workplace. Now we're going to try these people are getting older. So maybe we're going to try and get their parents on there because it's more about those types of relationships. And then we change because it has to be a different thing it has to be a good different thing at different times for it to be able to grow beyond
Yep.
the initial thing that it started at.
Yeah.
So Twitter again, I think, you know, without looking at and like it might be interesting to look at Twitter's growth from, okay, well, where did it swap from? And I think I know, which is where did it swap from the people in the Bay Area posting pictures of their breakfast to each other, to maybe at the South by Southwest moment
I was
when
gonna
the
say it was the South by
advertisers got
Southwest
hold of
one.
it, right? And then media got hold of it, and then the play then was, okay, well, how do we get out? Because then I think Twitter decided to go after media, and there's also the whole we're going to try being a platform with the whole message bus thing, right? Like they
So
tried out a whole bunch of stuff.
I don't so I think the moment is slightly different. I think that South by was still early adopter. The place where Twitter really took off was news is happening on this thing live right now. And so, for
Yes,
example, the
yeah,
Sully
Twitter Spring.
landing the plane in the Hudson was like one of those moments where everybody's like, "Holy shit! I have to pay attention to this and actually need to be able to gather information from this,
yes,
and sort of drive that." So that's one factor.
no, yeah, yeah,
The other factor was actually media people were and I talked about this with my friend from who just left Blue Sky. There was a moment for millennial journalists where the media ecosystem and the economics of the media ecosystem were changing quite dramatically. And so actually there's a collapse of the type of career path that people had,
oh
and
yeah, yeah,
the type of mentorship that you could possibly get. And so everybody was told that they had to be online that essentially you were participating in a peer mentoring network. And that's a thing that we don't see today. Like the nature of why should you be on social media is different now, and the sort of like broad addressability I think has changed somewhat as well. But that's one of those things that really drove the dynamic around Twitter. And the two things that like Twitter was for journalists was being able to post and promote your stuff, and then having that peer group that you were riffing with, or all those sorts of things, right? Which was the type of capture that you got at the moment, and I think snowballed and continued to connect to other things. And of course, Twitter had a team that was trying to get celebrities on, and that was driven by verification systems and like the insanity of the fact that like you could just post at Shaq and he would reply, right? Like that was insane.
Yeah,
yeah, it was access. That's the other thing. Is like I think like it's easy to forget now that part of the charm was the access. There was this sort of illusion of intimacy, or this understanding of it being a frictionless interaction between yourself and people who you would never meet otherwise, which was, I think, like part of the value proposition was like, this is where you are going to meet people that you literally are never going to meet otherwise. And I think that was true. You could meet those people if you spent the money to fly to that conference.
Yeah.
Or you knew them already, or you were friends with them already, or whatever. Whereas the hashtag, and this is, I think, like where the hashtag got very valuable, could instantly put you in line with like other people who wish to experience this are here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember I remember the real-time stuff because that's when in my work we started pitching it. So TV started getting interested in it, right? So it was like, you can talk about this stuff right now with other people who are watching this right now. And I remember the prompts in the text box in the submission fields changing to like what's happening right now, or what's happening.
Yeah,
so that moment. And also, so Madeline, when you talk about access, it's like, well, blogging democratized publishing, but maybe the microblogging or collapsing it to an audience of everyone democratized replying.
Yes.
I hadn't thought about it in the context of like playing with that parasocial to social boundary. That it was doing a very specific type of blurring, and both enabling more parasocial relationships on the one hand, but giving people an opportunity to be able to form certain types of relationships with people, right? It's a different type of restructuring than just the like, I watch you on TV.
Yeah. And I think the mentoring part, in my head, I can think of it as a little bit of, if you got good at Twitter, and then you amassed an audience, then you were more likely to be able to get a reply, right? If you try to engage with, if you try to engage or have a conversation with someone who was more established and had, for example, a bigger audience than you, then they might pay more attention to you if you had already demonstrated that, oh, right, no, this person is pretty interesting. They must be pretty good at what they're doing. Or
it was like, did you each have the right number of electrons? Like was your valence the same, or were your valence compatible, and stuff, but also that sort of floated down to kind of like vibes too, right? I mean, like I think it was, you could look at it as the numbers game, but it was also about like a gut instinct about, is this person even real? Why is there an egg? Blah blah blah. Like,
right.
Are they a bot or not? Or like, as it later became, are they a bot or not?
Yeah, I mean, the dynamics around that were always so fascinating, because we even got to the point where it's like, what's this person's alt? Can I hunt it down? And a set of journalists who are really good at that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And all the incredibly popular, platform popular pseudonymous accounts.
Yeah.
Yes.
But even that whole notion, right? Like the crazy part about that was so much of the sleuthing for alts was also enabled by like Facebook's recommender systems fundamentally. And so like all of this is like dynamics of these spaces that were made, and how people engaged with them and so forth. Dan says that he needs to go find his. Also, everyone can see all of these messages, Dan, because I'm, of course, streaming the Zoom window here. So Dan, I think, is going to go find some power. So I will vamp for a moment and also say, "Hi, Madeline. How are things going?" And also, like, um, it, it ha- were you aware that Dan and I were chat on the regular about some of this stuff?
No, I wasn't. Like I just saw him talking about it on Blue Sky, of course. And I it was the better method of procrastination than doom scrolling and like uh or cleaning, which could have also been doing and decided not to. And so it seemed healthier. Like talking to other people seemed healthier. and, or something. And also I was just like, we hadn't talked in a really long time. So I was like, oh yeah, this clearly this was meant to happen. And I think that gets into that serendipity aspect of like a lot of those microblogging platforms of like what pops up and when and why, and like why did you see it at that time, and it really introduced in an increasingly mechanized and sort of predictable, at the time, world. It really introduced this sort of pixie dust of serendipity and happenstance and coincidence and stuff like that in a way that other people could immediately twig to. Like, oh my God, this person just randomly showed up, and it got that kind of like randomness of. I think I've been like reading all the reviews of The Materialist despite not having seen it. But it gets at the randomness that's at the core of like a lot of really classic like rom-coms, which is about
Yes.
you both live in the city and you crossed paths at this time. And I think like when social media is quite good, it sort of gives you that When Harry Met Sally kind of feeling. Like it gives you that sense of anything is possible. You could run into anybody. And I often think that like the actual like metric of like a good social network should be how many relationships came out of it.
Yeah.
Marriages.
Yeah, like how many,
Yeah.
how many marriages came out of it should be the bar rather
Yeah.
than, and of course, like that's one, no one should have to give up that information. And two,
Right.
it's very specific to me, but I also think like again, it's that neighborhood bar kind
Yeah.
of humor or that kind of idea that like if it's good, not only will people want to stay, they will draw other people there.
This is the point
And
at which I reveal that. Actually, I don't know whether I've told Dan this. My wife and I met on Orson Scott Card's message board.
oh wow.
Yeah, and the way that I put this is we met on the internet back when that was creepy. And like right, like it was.
That's how my wife and I met. We met playing the AI ARG. We had a whole, and then the community had a whole IRC channel and everything. I was a community moderator on it.
Yeah, and everybody used to talk about people getting fake married in World of Warcraft and then real married
Yes.
in
Yeah,
from
yeah,
World of
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Warcraft,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that was like a
yeah,
legible path though, and like okay, weird nerds doing the weird nerd things, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I think,
And
yeah, I think it is that like it is the kind of it is one of the like if we were looking at the milestones of like whether or not something like this is successful, it's where the community online and the community not online um line up, like the where there is a commonality between creating a spot in physical space and a spot in digital space. And increasingly, of course, those are permeable until, of course, you have a massive communications outage. It's
this
but
is
yeah.
this is where I get really pissed off about the appropriation of language, right? Because it's around that time, like shortly afterwards, we had platforms talking about, this is a place where you can have authentic relationships with real people,
Mm,
right? Like, and
yeah.
we had this whole stuff about authenticity, about these are real people, and we already had that, and this was manufactured manufactured intimacy, or like you can be on this massive platform and then you can have an authentic relationship with someone, but there's no real, without that sense of place or without that sense of purpose, there's no real reason for it, for you to be social with these other people. It really did feel like, okay, well, great, you got me a megaphone in Times Square, or I'm at Speaker's Corner, right?
Yeah.
Which I think then comes back to the Twitter part of, if you can perform, then you can, one way is that you can perform and you can perform well, and then you can attract an audience around yourself. And then that is a way, you can either, if you attract an audience around yourself, then you can create community around that, or you can become visible to a community and then you can join it that way. Yeah. So one thought that I had, kind of going back to, it sounds like we were all on Usenet.
No,
a little bit.
I had to read the research studies of Usenet in order to become conversant in it.
I was hanging out on BB Code and IRC.
Okay.
That was more my speed.
Yeah. So talking about the sustainability about it, right? So Usenet, academic network, funded as a sort of public good, or because no one was looking at the time, right? And it was like, okay, I guess we're running Usenet servers. It doesn't really take much to operate them. We've got sysadmins doing it anyway. And then we had the evolution to, wait, it turns out that these binary news groups are taking up a lot of resources, so we'll stop hosting those at universities. You would directly pay for the infrastructure for a Usenet community when you had to join an ISP, right? So your membership fees to that ISP would go towards maintaining your Usenet, like in the way back when it was, actual internet ISPs. That would happen. And then, that got abstracted away by VC money and runway money, right? Into, okay, well, someone else is going to pay this to you because we've figured out how to make it free.
Yeah.
So this is actually, I think, an important point about this particular moment, and also then, right? Because again, we've gone through several transitions since then. One of which is, like, if we're talking Usenet days, people were barely starting to get cell phones, and you paid per text message that you sent. And so the internet and WhatsApp's innovation was, fuck that, you could just communicate as much as you want. You don't have to pay the highwayman a bunch of this money. And the expectation now, and the devices that we have, are not that thing, right? And so if you look at something like Blue Sky, again, I'm going to keep on, because they're proximate and because they're having to go through all this stuff again, I think it's useful as instructive as an example. You can run the infrastructure that Blue Sky has built for fairly cheap, enough that you can get 10 people together and pay for it. What you can't do is host all of the images and video. And the expectation around this, right, I think is like, that's where, again, some of these economies of scale and things like that end up becoming critical. And one of the things I'm curious about is the extent to which, like, if you look at Blue Sky and the way that the ecosystem works right now, you've got the main company running almost all of the infrastructure, like 99% of it. You've got the shell of like indie developers and people who are running services that can actually function completely within the network and independent of Blue Sky. But if we're actually asking them to bear the weight of everybody's attention, it's just not going to work, right? And so it'd be interesting to see whether or not there is a version of this where you say, we're just going to do text again, for example. That's subsidizable by a smaller community, versus what does it mean actually to have a full spectrum kind of view of the things that people actually ultimately want.
So I did that. So I tried to figure out the cost per user, like how much it costs to run a Mastodon instance like sfba.social.
Sure.
Because they were being quite public about how much the monthly running costs were for them. And I think I managed to get it down to, if you wanted to be a member of this, maybe, for it to be self-sustaining, you want, X many people to be able to be paying $5 to $10 a month for you to be, and that would have been their cost for doing that full, media hosting as part of a federated social network, and then being able to do all of that. This kind of gets into my, stupid pie in the sky. Okay, well, so one of these transitions, we're going from metered to unmetered, right? In whichever whichever attribute. So, the people's experience of the internet when they got to college, and then suddenly you didn't have to pay for it. You didn't have to pay for it, or you didn't have to pay for right, or it was faster. Like I remember, like, holy shit, you mean I get Ethernet in my dorm room?
Yeah,
I'm never leaving my dorm room.
Done that.
Right. Right. So then you've got that same transition from text messaging. You've got that same transition to, that, okay, fine. The economics of that, we're just moving bits and bytes around, so we don't have to worry. It got a lot cheaper for that. But I really don't know, how cheap can you get? And if you are talking about when media becomes unsustainable, because you've got people like Apple saying, well, you know what, if you actually want 2 terabytes of storage on iCloud, then we're going to charge you $30 a month, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because we can. You can get it cheaper elsewhere. Like Dropbox are just going to charge you whatever for that kind of cloud storage. But I always used to have this stupid idea about, well, okay, if we've got universal service, then do you get universal compute? Like, do you get universal storage? Does every citizen or every resident of a country get like 10 gig free a year or whatever you want? Like, should you? Like, does a society think that's useful?
It might now,
good?
especially like given what is it, Denmark, and I think it might have been Norway, it might have been it was someone else, but today it was Denmark. Granted likeness rights. Like you are now, which is a thing that like I had always thought was instantiated in law already, but maybe needs greater codification now about like who owns the rights to your likeness, how do you, and then also crucially, because this is the thing that I'm always, I guess, sort of interested in, is how do you then pass those rights down? So that
using a blockchain,
your children have access to those things, and not necessarily, you can't like then be, your image can't necessarily be sold, or maybe it can, maybe it's an asset. If the likeness is an asset class, then what are your rights to your own asset class and stuff? So it's sort of like that. And if that's the case, then having a ton of storage for everything you've done, like carrying, the great and ponderous chain that Charles Dickens talks about, like, dragging those things behind you like Marley's ghost, is what you might end up doing.
So then an extrapolation of this is, if you're going to say internet access is a human right, then is access enough? What would you build on top of that, right? If you then would say, okay, right, so then do I need compute? Like, if I don't have compute, right, does that mean I don't really have good enough access? Does access mean usage?
The stick around, but I don't have a device to plug it into, then it's, then it's just, it's worth the amount of rare earth minerals that made it, and that's it.
Well, so I think this actually directly pertains to the way that Blue Sky's built. Interestingly, because of the fact that, and the thing I was going to say, Dan, is I think that Mastodon's a bad example of how to do this, and so figuring out what the cost per user is weird, because of the fact that Mastodon doesn't allow you to resource share in any way, shape, or form. If you run a Mastodon instance,
it's horrible.
There is no fractional cost. You own everything. And the interesting thing about the way that Blue Sky is set up is that participation in the network is structured differently, and the way that the network is structured is different. And so participating in the network and having your own PDS and being able to host your own data is totally feasible and doable. And you can participate, fully within the network as a user. And the people who bear those costs right now are Blue Sky. And the reason why they're doing that is because they own the relationship between the end user, the large consumer base, who have the app and are serving content to that app, and that's kind of the key power relationship that they are trying to manage. And so, like right now, who's doing all of that data processing and like serving? It's Blue Sky, who are running caching layers essentially, and running the majority of the feeds, paying for the apps and the staff to make sure that that stuff is online and loads quickly. Versus like if you host your own PDS, you totally can, but like your PDS can get DOSed then if it gets hammered, or like if you're building another service that's connecting to your PDS or whatever. So like interestingly, we're in that world already, and we know right now it's being subsidized by VCs functionally.
So so I love this. I'm gonna have to run, but one of the things that I think is congruent with what the point of a community is so one of the ways that Blue Sky is architected, both the app and the AT protocol, is that I think it makes it significantly easier for Blue Sky to say, if you want to be able to post images and videos, then that's $1 a month. Otherwise, it can be free.
Yeah.
Because you can gate that at the PDS layer, right? So that it is your personal data store. So it is the equivalent of saying, hey, right, if you want to store like 10 gigs worth of images and video on your social network account, then that's $3 a month, and then we can gate it that way. And that, I think, to your point, Madeline, is that is a choice where you say, our network will grow faster and we will accrue more users if we make it free to post images and video, right? So therefore, we need runway to be able to do that, so that we can accrue however many users, so that we can do investor unicorn story, right?
What's interesting about this is that what we're fundamentally saying is that Blue Sky is a type of library or archive.
Yes. Yeah.
AT Proto is.
Yeah. No, I mean their CDN is a library or an archive.
Yes.
That they serve from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is what a CDN is, a nice, trendy 21st century name for library.
You have to go. Should we?
Yeah,
we have our first live guest. Let's give Madeline a chance to say hi and do you have things that you want to plug?
I should probably plug a book. Let me see if I can find it.
It's a really good book.
There it is. Hold on. I don't know. Will this be reversed? It'll probably be super reversed. Oh, maybe not.
No, I can. Yeah.
But this is that book. You can buy it. Someone could buy it, or just get it out of your library.
Your library.
Improve your library's user stats, and also if you request it at a library, that counts against certain metrics of Nielsen scan and other whatever, I think, and
nice.
Whatever. Or if you're in Canada, like I am, we get paid the public lending right. So we get a check every year that's a sampling of however many either libraries grabbed your book and how many people checked it out, or there's a very, I don't know, arcane equation for giving us money. But
this is one of those things that I've been trying to figure out and understand better, because there's been so much discussion about how expensive ebooks are for libraries. And I've recently been seeing a lot more about what do authors actually get out of this, which has been really heartening. And Libby is great. There's
the regionally it will be different. Like in Canada versus the US, that's different. But also Canada is a lot more similar to France or other EU countries in that regard, that they pay their artists in a different way, or Ireland also has a similar scheme, where that is also seen as encouraging literacy and encouraging sort of civic participation and other stuff, and that as well as national identity. But it's still good for us, even if people ask me, I was not prepared when I became a published novelist, that people would ask me what is the best way for me to buy your book for you? Like that,
Yes.
like, where is your cut the best? And I'm still like, the writer is usually still on like step one, which is, you want my book? Like it's like you're still there. And
Right,
then you're
right.
like, um, you know, the so it's it is better for us when it's actually like, I want to say, frankly, it's better for us when you buy from an indie or from bookshop.org or like
Uh-huh.
from those places, because those continue to again create communities.
Input. Yeah. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
one, the input is better and creates like hand selling data and stuff like that. And actually the data from those small shops is easier in some ways for the publisher to see, because one of the ways
Mhm.
that Amazon and the others sort of generate what they do is by sitting on some of that data, or not really making clear
Mm.
how those numbers come
Right.
out, how the ranking, like, you can look at your ranking, how they came to it is more of the special sauce, or more of the
Uh-huh.
secret sauce. And they're that way with publishers as well. So it's like, even if you're in the big three, big five publishers, like, if Amazon is sitting on that data, it's sort of like Netflix and their
Yeah,
ratings,
I was going to
Yeah.
say,
right?
yeah.
And where Netflix won't necessarily give, uh, even highfalutin production companies, they won't necessarily give out that data on like how they came to that rating. And versus, you know, um, a small independent theater, or a theater chain, or a small, or an indie bookstore, or just a physical bookstore, will give those receipts back. Like, they
Right.
Mm.
will sort of
Mm.
turn in that data, and it'll become a lot more clear a lot more quickly. It is tougher with books for whatever reason, I don't know. But but yeah, it's always
I, I,
I just like seeing it in people's hands. I mean,
yeah. Connecting it back to community, I think, is kind of fascinating, and I guess,
yes.
again, the theme the theme of the podcast. So, thank
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
for helping us tie
yeah.
that up,
That's it.
and I guess we should say, I guess I should stop streaming, and we can say bye to Dan too. So, thank
Yeah.
you very much,
Yeah.
Madeline, for
Thank you
impromptu
for
joining us, and this was
helping
fun.
me
Yeah,
procrastinate. I
yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
All right.
Uh, Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk next time. Bye.
Okay.